This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Bruchim Abam, welcome back. This is a second point of Iyun on Daf Ayin Beis, and this is a really fundamental aspect of the bris milah of someone who is mashuch ba'ar lasai. We know the Gemara said that Rav Huna said that someone who is mashuch ba'ar lasai does not really require milah mida'iraisa. Someone who pulls their foreskin to cover where their milah was cut to make it look like they don't have a milah, they only require milah midrabanan, and they are only precluded from eating truma midrabanan. Presumably, the reason they don't have to do milah is because they already were circumcised. Is that the reason? Or is the reason they don't have to do milah midaraisa because they don't have an arla? Is it because they were already circumcised and you only have to be circumcised once? Or is it because, no, technically you have to be circumcised as many times as need be, but this person does not have an arla to cut, they just pulled it. Listen to this question. The Taz, this Taz is found in Yeridea, Siman Reish Samach Daled Sivkatan Tes. The Taz talks about the following case. Umistapkali, I am a supik, Im Noilad Mohol. If someone was born circumcised, v'hitifim mimeno dam bris, and they cause the blood of the covenant to drip, v'yacher kach mikoch shamnoi, and because the kid was so fat, nisrabe, his skin got bigger, v'nimshach ha'or lamala, v'loy nira kol ha'atara. Now you can't see the corona, afil achar hakishoy, even when the aver is bekishoy. In other words, the kid was born gemalt. He was born circumcised. But we still have to do hatafas dam bris. But then, he became mashuch ba'ar lasai. Does he need a milah? So he doesn't need a milah, but he was already, no, he wasn't circumcised. I mean, what's the reason mashuch ba'ar lasai doesn't need milah? Is it because he already was circumcised? So this kid was not circumcised. He was born mahol, and he only had hatavas dam bris. So maybe this kid needs milah. Or is it that mashuch ba'ar lasai is not an arla? Mi nema, should we say shetzarach lachtoy ha'ar be'izemel? Now we got to cut the skin with a knife, l'sakne karai. Dekanin shayach loymar. Here you can't say shekvar hayanimel karai min haTorah. He already was circumcised. At that time he didn't have an arla. Isn't this like kisoy hadam that the Gemara says in Chulan Adab Pei Zayin? The kisohu haruach. If, let's say, you shecht an animal and you cover it, the blood, and then it gets uncovered, you don't have to cover it again. But if the wind covers it and then it becomes uncovered, you have to cover it again. Chayiv l'chasas. The ein dichoy etzel mitzvahs. Mitzvahs don't get pushed off. Hachanami mamish keinhu. This is exact parallel case. You're right, the kid was born mahol, but that's like the blood being covered by the wind. So now the kid has an arla, you got to cut it. We don't care that he wasn't fit to be circumcised at the time. Or do we say, no, by the case of Kisei Adam, there's blood there that has to be covered. But here, there's no arla. The kid was born without an arla. His skin became fat. That's not an arla. That's not a natural arla. Maybe Aidilma Deshani Yachadim in Atari Enchiv Raka Arla B'Toilada. Only an arla that's natural. V'loy Mashen Nimshach Achakach. Says the Taz, it's pashut that if someone was noilad mahol ktsas, and then you did milah, and then it was nimshach ha'ar, in other words, if the kid was noilad mahol ktsas, but not completely, of course, if it's nimshach barlasa, you got to cut it off. But the Taz has this very interesting Chakira. We know that Mashach Ba'arlasai does not need a Milah. Is it because the child already had a Milah? Is that the reason? And in this case, where the kid did not have a Milah, he requires a Milah? Or is the reason why Mashach Ba'arlasai does not require Milah, not because he had a Milah, but because this is not an Arla? That's the suffix of the Taz. But the Taz has a valid possibility that if a kid was born already circumcised, and you did have Tafas Dam Bris, and then it was Mashach Ba'arlasai, you have to do Milah because the kid never had a Milah. Comes a Sha'agas Aryeh, and he seems to blow the Taz out of the waters. Do you remember the Gemara in Daf Ayin Aleph? The Gemara had a Shaila. How is it possible that for the Shechita, somebody may have a child who doesn't have an issue with the Milah, and before the Achilas Karban Pesach, a person has a child who does not have a Milah? The Gemara says, isn't it where the kid was born exactly at the time in between the Shechita and the Achila 8 days earlier, or the kid's fever broke then? The Gemara is looking for a scenario. How do you have a case where the Milah was not an issue before the Shechita and became an issue before the Achila? So comes a Sha'agas Aryeh and he says, if the Taz was correct, that a kid who was born with a Milah and had a Tafas Dam Bris, and then his skin became fat, the Taz has a tzad that the kid requires Milah, then why is the Gemara in Ayin Aleph searching for cases of how is it possible that a kid's Milah was only an issue before the Achila but not before the Shechita? We have a very simple scenario according to the Taz. A kid who was born Mahol, he had a Tafas Dam Bris, he was a fat kid, and then all of a sudden in between the Shechita and the Achila, he became Nimshach Ba'arlasai. Says the Sha'agas Aryeh, we have to go to his kever in France, in Metz. Anyone want to go? Uladidi pshitoli, says the Sha'agas Aryeh. To me, it's obvious. The betarvayu, both cases. Bein benoel mo lagamri. Whether he was completely circumcised. Bein benoel mo ksas, even though it's nimshach or achar kach, it's like he was circumcised, and you don't need to do a milah. V'raya brura l'tvarai. The proof that a kid who was born mahol and then became mashach ba'arlasai does not need to do a milah is from the Gemara in Ayin Aleph. The Gemara says, "Ein li ela milah zachar b'shas asiyah v'avador shas achila minayin liten es ha'amr shel zeh b'zeh tamla azaz gzer shava." The Gemara says, how do you have zacharav b'shas achila and not b'shas asila? And the Gemara is looking for a case. V'hashta yisaka daitach dechol kahagavna tzorach lamulay min ha'Torah benim shachar kiven lo nima adayin b'shampan garoi hamishkach zo zachav desnu b'shas achil v'snu b'shas asir kon shenon mal. The kid was born mahal kahagavna v'nim shachar ben asil achil da'achshav chala mitzvah smila. Must be shma mina that such a case, such a kid, there's no chi of mila min ha'Torah. It must be that a kid who was born gemalt and then became nimshach ba'arlasai, there's no mitzvah milah, even though he was never gemalt. Meaning, l'chayra we see that that's not called an RL. L'chayra we see that's not called an RL. That's the Sha'agas Aryeh's bomb question on the Taz. So the Sefer Arza de Beirav, Reb Leib Gorvitz, he wants to answer this question of the Sha'agas Aryeh. He wants to say Why would the Taz hold that if a kid was born circumcised and then he became Mashach Ba'arlasai, you would have to do Milah? Why would you have to do a Milah? Is it that the kid is considered an Arla, or perhaps there's still a mitzvah of Milah? Is it that there's a mitzvah of Milah? Or is it that the kid is deemed an Arel? So Reb Leib Gorowitz wants to say that the tzad of the Taz of why somebody who became Mashach Ba'arlasai, who never had a Milah, needs to have a Milah, it's not because the person is considered an Arla, that might not be considered an Arla, but there is still a mitzvah of Milah to reveal the Atara. He says, Nira dedas hatazu, rakla hatzricha Milah misham mitzvahs Milah. Milah is required for the sake of circumcision. Aval Arel loy mikri, you're not called an Arel. Ule'inyin Pesach, regarding the Hakrava, the Karm Pesach, af bezachar ba'avadav. When it comes to the males and the servants of your household, it's not what's ma'akev you bringing the Karm Pesach. It's not the mitzvah of Milah that's ma'akev, it's the Arla that's ma'akev. Ha'arlas, ha'arelos hu da ma'akva, v'loy mitzvahs Milah. U'k'may shekasav hagrach, B'ksavim, like the grach proves in the letters that what's ma'akev the hakravas karim pesach is not the milah. It's not the milah. It's the arelos. Shapasak the tfilas ha'amhoisa ma'akvasa b'pesach my milas avodav. Bottom line is, the Taz may be correct that someone who had a Milah and then became Mashach Ba'arlasai requires Milah. But nevertheless, it would not be Ma'akev the Hakravas Karm Pesach, because even though you require a Milah, you're not considered an Arel. I have a hard time with this answer for two reasons. To me, the words of the Taz imply, in the Taz's suffix, the Taz says, do we say that the Taz says, here you can't say the child was circumcised already, because he didn't have an Arla at all, and it's like, the Taz compares it to Kisei Hadam, where if the wind covers it, you got to do it again. Or the Taz says, Shani hacha ein chiyav rak ha'arla b'toilada. Oh, you only have to circumcise what's a natural arla. But nimshach acher is not called an arla. So doesn't that sound like the first sad is, it is called an arla? Or the Reb Leib Gorowitz is learning, no, it's not called an arla, but you still have to cut it. And would you say that, what is ma'akev somebody from eating the Karim Pesach? Having a child who's an Arel, or doing the mitzvah of Milah? I thought the Gemara's mashma doing the mitzvah of Milah. That's why someone who is an Oines, who even though they are an Arel, but you can't do the mitzvah of Milah, that's not ma'akev. The Gemara seemed to imply that what's ma'akev achilas Karm Pesach is the mitzvah of Milah, not the status of arelos. Anyway, that's the suffix of the Taz. That somebody who is born mahol, had hatafas dam bris, and then became mashach ba'arlasai, whether that person requires Milah. Do we say they never had Milah, so now it has to be done like kisei hadam, if the ruach covered it, and then it became uncovered, you have to cover it? Or do we say you don't have to cover something that's not Arla b'taldasai? Okay, Rabbi Sai, thanks for joining. So Be'ez Hashem, this week, Monday night, Tuesday night, like regular schedule. And we'll see beyond that. Bracha v'atzlacha. Have a great rest of the week. Kol Tov. Hi, Mac. Oh, 1 second. My volume is very low. Sorry. Yeah.
Would it make a difference if he was born circumcised and then no blood was taken out and then the fat or whatever, he grew it back, and therefore it was never like a closure to it? So maybe there could be there, or it wouldn't make a difference.
You're asking, would it matter if, let's say, the kid never had hatafas dam bris? So now, do you only need hatafas dam bris, or do we say? So that's a third sugya that was a very big sugya. What does hatafas dam bris do? That's another chakira. This idea that if somebody is born mahol, you have to be do hatafas dam bris. What does hatafas dam bris do? Does hatafas dam bris make it that the person has a milah, doesn't have an orla, or it's just some kind of like ceremonial covenant of dam? In other words, what does hatafas dam bris do? Does hatafas dam bris make a person not an orel? Was a person not an orel already? If a person does not have hatafas dam bris, are they an orel? Is someone who does not have hatafas dam bris, are they considered an orel? That's also up for grabs.
I just want to maybe go back to square one. If it grows back, so then you're starting over in quote unquote. That would be
right. Right.
I didn't understand the Sha'agas. It doesn't seem like it could ever be realistic that the skin would fatten up and grow in that time spent between shchitza and afilah.
I mean, it's not a very likely scenario that it would happen then.
In that time span, right?
Yeah, but let's say he waited a year. I don't know. He never got to it or whatever. I don't know. He waited 2 or 3 years. I don't know.
Right. It was fine. He wasn't chayiv.
No, but the Gemara is looking for a scenario between the shchita and the achila. So, or maybe let's say the person pulled it then. In other words, they not just nisra, normally when you're mashach ba'Allah, so you only need mila midrabanan. But what if somebody was noilad mahol and then did mashach ba'Allah between the shchita and the achila? That could be a scenario.
Okay.
Okay, shkayach everyone. Thank you very much. Kol tov. Have a good day.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.